honor to be up here, to be fighting with a recording in progress statement. It is my honor to be up here to introduce my dear friend, Gil Hovav. This is our 50th anniversary year, as Mindy mentioned, and we have been doing a series of programs all year long to celebrate. And this series of lectures that we've been having, and Gil is part of it, is in memory of one of our members who passed away, Alan Armis, who was very much part of the fabric of our community. And this speaker series is in his memory. I have known Gil Hovav and his husband, Dani Halperin, since I was posted in Israel in the mid-1980s. So you could say we go back a ways. Gili is a well-known Israeli TV presenter, culinary journalist, restaurant critic, memoirist, and author. He has been called Israel's most famous television chef and cookbook writer. And I can say that my sister who lives in Israel swears by his cookbooks. And she sends her regards, by the way. For a time, Gili was the voice of the announcements at Ben Gurion Airport. Apparently, he was annoyed by the grammatical errors in the airport's Hebrew announcements, so he called the airport's management and complained. The management responded by saying something along the lines of, if you don't like the way the announcements are read, come up and read them yourself. Never one to pass up a challenge, that's exactly what Gili did. I remember arriving in Israel during that period to visit my sister and slowly realized as I was making my way through the airport that I recognized the voice during the announcements. Whenever I go to Israel, I always arrange to try and get together with Gili and his husband, Dani, and we always have a great time. The conversation is invariably quite lively, and there is usually delicious and unusual food involved. In addition to his skills as an author, Gili has a most distinguished lineage. He is the grandson of Itamar ben Avi, who began modern Israeli journalism, and is the great-grandson of Eliezer ben Yehuda, who almost single-handedly revived Hebrew as a modern language. Gili will be talking to us today about growing up in the family of such famous namesakes. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Gil Hovav. The microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Shalom, everybody. I'm very, very, very glad and honored to be here. Well, before we start, I should just say that you may not be aware of it, but I owe you big time, and I'll tell you why. So, as you've understood from Joe's beautiful eulogy, I'm for the past 37 years, I'm living with Dani, my partner. It feels like 38, but we won't get into this. Dani was my officer in the intelligence service, and as our daughter noted when she was 5 years old, now she's 22 years old, Dani was Gili's officer in the army, and Gili's Dani's officer in life. And that's the way it should be. But I hope it is clear to all of us that I married beneath me. You know, Dani is a mere professor of computer science in the Tel Aviv University. I'm Gil Hovav, come on. But no, he thinks he's superior. And for two reasons mainly. One is that I know nothing in math, which is true. And the second one is that I dislike classical music, and I do. So one day, I get a phone call from the Israeli Philharmonic, and they ask me to be the host of a concert. They have this series called the Philharmonic in Jeans, namely concerts for idiots. And these whole concerts are hosted by minor celebrities, and since I'm a minor celebrity, they asked whether I would do it or not. And not that I like or know anything about classical music, but I knew that it would kill Dani, so immediately I said yes. And they said, yes, it's within a week. Now we understand that I'm not a minor celebrity, I'm a nano celebrity, because of course, nobody calls you a week before and saying, come and host a concert unless somebody, you know, ran away. But I was there to help them. So here I am on stage at Heichal HaTarbut, at the big concert hall in Tel Aviv, interviewing the conductor and talking to the opera singer and this and that. And all through the concert, I see Dani's eyes in the hall, shimmering with fear. By the end of the concert, he came to pick me up from the green room, and I was sure he would say it was horrible or something like that. He looked at me gray-faced and said, "That was the end of Western civilization." So just imagine when he hears that I'm here at Bet Mishpacha lecturing to all of you, he would die. And it's because of you, so thank you very much. I appreciate it. Toda, yes. So I'm here to talk to you about my great-grandfather, Eliezer ben Yehuda. See, he's on my shirt. We even have merchandising. So Eliezer ben Yehuda revived Hebrew. Hebrew wasn't spoken for 2,000 years, and because of him in Israel, we all speak Hebrew. And this is a miracle that happened only once in history. No other language came back from the dead, none, only Hebrew. And so let me start the story near the end. So picture me, some 40 years ago, as a journalist in a local newspaper in Jerusalem, but I started really from the bottom. If they opened the new, I don't know, saw crack in the department store, I would write one line about it, and I was sure that I'm at least Emile Zola. But still, there's a newspaper, and I liked sitting at the desk and seeing how current affairs are becoming headlines. And one day I was at the desk, and then we got word that it happened yet again. What happened yet again? So, since most of you are not Jerusalemites, you may not be aware of the fact that in Jerusalem we have a very, very nice tradition. At least once a year, sometimes twice a year, members of the ultra Orthodox community of Jerusalem, the Neturei Karta, the super religious, arm themselves with bats and axes and bottles of black spray, go up to the old cemetery of Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, break into the burial plot of my family, which is surrounded by a fence, desecrate all the graves and smear them with nasty graffitis. And then City Hall fixes it, and then it happens yet again and again and again and again for years and years. And I didn't know what to do, whether I should call my elderly aunt and tell her that the graves of her parents and her grandparents were desecrated yet again. It's not a pleasant piece of news to convey to an elderly aunt. I won't tell you what I did. If you behave, maybe in the end I will. But for the time being, let's think about it. What was it, and what is it still, in this short, red-headed, blood-coughing, annoying person, Eliezer ben Yehuda, that keeps everybody so charged with his image and figure and legacy? What is it in this person lacking any sense of humor, very sensitive about respect, that on one hand, 100 years after he died, makes super religious people in Jerusalem still wake up in the middle of the night and go up to the cemetery uphill and break into the burial plot, etc., etc. And on the other hand, makes UNESCO, the culture organization of the UN, declare him in a big ceremony in Paris as one of Western civilization's greatest culture figures. It was a big ceremony some 20 years ago. Eliezer ben Yehuda, Haydn, and Newton none of them came, and we were not invited, but he was declared. So, Laser Perelman, that's the original name, was born in 1858 in Eastern Europe, in Lithuania, in a little town called Luzhki, a little town filled with mud, as he described it, to a traditional family of the time of the mid-19th century, very religious, very poor. Shortly after he was born, his father passed away. His mom was left with 5 children. And a few years later, she realized that she had to make a choice that for us nowadays would sound satanic, but at the time it was quite common. She understood that she did not have enough bread to put on the table for 5 children and that one of them had to go. And she chose little Laser. She said he's the sharpest of them all, and maybe with his wits, he would be able to survive without a family. He was sent to live with a distant relative, not rich, but at least not dirt poor, very strict, very religious, very unhappy about the fact that he had yet another mouth to feed. Was educated in a Jewish school in a cheder, immediately spotted as an Ilui, as a genius. We're talking about the middle of the 19th century. Hebrew is totally dead. Think of Latin today, like the language of a prayer, maybe some old manuscripts, but nobody speaks it. But scholars in Germany and the north of France start toying with their the synagogue language, with their biblical language, and trying to translate into this dead language modern writings. And one of Laser Perelman's rabbis was such a scholar, and through him he got hold of a book in Hebrew. Would you know what was the first book that a reviver of the Hebrew language read in Hebrew? Except for the Bible and the Mishnah and the Talmud, of course. I'm talking about an outer book. Robinson Crusoe. A very naive translation of Robinson Crusoe into very thin Hebrew. He reads it and he falls in love with the language. And one night his remote uncle catches him in bed reading this forbidden, for God's sake. It's not Playboy, it's Robinson Crusoe. But Jewish children were not supposed to read outer books. He tells him, "You cast shame upon my home and my family. Take your tefillin and leave." Think of it. A 15-year-old kid thrown out in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter in Eastern Europe, no family, no community, nothing. What would he do? He tells himself, I'll start walking towards the east. Moscow is in the east. Maybe one day I'll get to Moscow. It's a big place, and there. We're talking about Europe before the two world wars. It's scattered, Eastern Europe is scattered with Jewish towns and villages, and he walks by foot from town to village, from village to town, being dependent on the kindness and hospitality of Jewish families. If he's lucky, they take him in, he gets a bowl of soup, maybe a bed to sleep in at night. If he's unlucky, he sleeps on a bench in a synagogue and then goes on. And here starts a chain of, I'm going to say a word that would sound very funny in connection with Eliezer ben Yehuda, but there's no other way to talk about it. A chain of miracles to follow him. Why can't we talk about Eliezer ben Yehuda and miracles in the same breath? Because he was never a believer, not for one day in his life. He never believed in God, he never believed in religion, he believed only in pure wisdom. But still, we cannot describe Eliezer ben Yehuda's life without talking about miracles. So miracle number one, this young man lies on a bench in the synagogue. Into the synagogue walks a rich Jew, Shlomo Naftali Herz Yonas, that's his name, a vodka maker for the Tsar. These are my genes, pay respect. Looks at the young man sleeping in the synagogue at night and asks him, who are you? Don't you have a home? Don't you have a family? Starts a conversation with the young person, and he's so impressed, Mr. Yonas is so impressed with the wits of the young man that he tells him, you know what, come and be a private tutor to my children at home. Unlike today, it's not that when your kids have problems with math or a foreign language, a private tutor would come for an hour or something like this. It's a resident tutor. He lives with the family, and he's in charge of the education of the Yonas children. And the way of this young red-headed man to thank Mr. Yonas for saving him from starvation and homelessness and you name it, is coming up to him a year later and telling him, well, Mr. Yonas, for the past year, I've been having an affair with your eldest daughter. Actually, we're doing it, but I'm going to marry her. And I'm going to take her to Palestine, where we'll teach all the Jews to speak Hebrew. Compared to nowadays, it's as if somebody would come to you and say, I'm having an illegal affair with your daughter, but I'm going to marry her and take her to Congo. And in Congo, we'll teach everybody to speak only Latin. Sounds very logical, right? But we're talking about miracles. Mr. Jonas looks at the fresh young man and says, a brilliant idea. But before you take my daughter to that God-forsaken province of the failing Ottoman Empire, Palestine, you're such a brilliant young man. Let me send you at my own expense to Paris, to the Sorbonne. You'll study medicine. Everybody needs a doctor all over the world. When you go to Palestine with my daughter, you'll work as a doctor and teach everybody how to speak. Well, Laser Perelman thinks about it for a while and says, you know what? Okay, takes the money, goes to Paris, sends beautiful letters about the Sorbonne, never enters the Sorbonne, sits in cafes, drinks all his money, and contracts tuberculosis, which at the time was half a death sentence. He's sent to Algeria, to a sanatorium to try and recover in the north of Africa, and there, two more miracles. Miracle number one, he meets a Frank, a Sephardi Jew, for the first time in his life. A Sephardi Jew from Jerusalem. Now, Sephardi Jews in Jerusalem knew some Hebrew. They didn't speak Hebrew with between themselves, but they knew more than the Ashkenazi Jews. And for the first time in his life, he hears Hebrew pronounced with the Sephardi accent. Now, it's very different. If I'll take a verse of our national poet, Chaim Nachman Bialik, who, by the way, detested Eliezer ben Yehuda, hated him. Anyways, it was a great poet, of course. So if I recite it in the Ashkenazi accent, it would sound like this. Shalom Rav Shuvech Tzipora Nechmedes. It's very nice, it's very round, it's very Central European. If I recite it in the Sephardi accent, the same verse, it would be Shalom Rav Shuvech Tzipora Nechmada. It's much more majestic. And the Laser Perelman hears this and says, this is what a Semitic language should sound like. And he starts speaking like this. An Ashkenazi person speaking Hebrew with Resh and Het and Ayin, his Hebrew sounded like Arabic. Miracle number two, this totally secular person writes in his memoir that one night he lies in bed, there's a lightning in the sky, and a big voice thunders upon him, the revival of the Jewish people in their own land, in their own language. And he knows that this would be his vocation, goes back to Western Europe, goes back to France, being at least decent, annoying, but decent. He sends a telegram to his fiance, to my great-grandmother, Dvorah Jonas, telling her, I'm really doing it. I'm really going to Palestine to teach all the Jews how to speak Hebrew again. This is not a place for a young, well-brought-up, delicate lady like yourself. You're exempt from this marriage. Marry whoever you will. But Dvorah is a tough cookie. And she won't let anyone fire her from her marriage by telegram. She conducts a marriage with him when he's not present. All night long, she dances in a white wedding gown with friends and relatives. The groom is in a different country, but it doesn't matter. At midnight, she sits down for one last game of chess with her father. Her father plays tough. At 4 a.m., he moves something on the board and says, checkmate, Dvorah. You lost. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe you don't have to marry this person and go to Palestine. She tells her father, I'm unlucky in games because I'm lucky in love. Changes her white wedding gown to a black suit, a black men's suit, and starts stealing the border in night trains to the west. You know, Jews could not travel freely in those days, so only night trains. Gets to Paris, grabs him by the collar, and says, you promised to marry me, and marry me you will. They get on a boat, sail to Palestine, they get married in Egypt on the way, and they get to the port of Palestine, to Jaffa, in 1881. This is very, very, very early Zionism. This is 20 years before the Congress of Herzl. They get to Palestine, and in Jaffa, in the port, Laser Perelman says three things. One, My name is no longer Lazer Perlman. My name is Eliezer ben Yehuda. Ben Yehuda, the son of Judah. Judah was the name of his late father, but Judah is also the name of the country, of the land of Israel. So I belong in here, not there. And actually, Ben Yehuda is a last name that many immigrants took for themselves when they came to Israel and wanted to show that they shed the diaspora behind them. Two, he says, I did not come to the land of Israel in order to be in Jaffa. I want to go to Jerusalem. Now, today, a trip from Jaffa to Jerusalem, depending on traffic, is 50 minutes or so. Back then, 8 hours in a winding road, uphill, Bab el Wad, with wolves and thieves and gangs and you name it. Everybody told him, okay, tomorrow take a horse and carriage and go. No, now, in the middle of the night, they get on a carriage and make the trip to Jerusalem. And three, he looks at Dvorah, his wife, and says, we make a vow that from now on, when our feet are on the land of Israel, we would never, ever utter a foreign word again. And if we lack something, we won't say the foreign term that we have for it in Yiddish, Russian, German, French, all the languages that they knew. We would describe it in Hebrew until I come up with a word for it. Now, they were very well educated. Both of them knew the Tanakh, Mishnah, Talmud. They had Hebrew. But in the Bible, nobody makes omelets for breakfast, right? No, the prophets did not do that. So if she wants to make breakfast, she has to say, Eliezer, give me the round metal thing that we put on the stove so I can, there is no word for scramble, so I can confuse a few eggs and we would have, there is no word for omelet, we would have that thing that people eat for breakfast. And then he would think, and remember that in the Bible, there is a dish called chavitim, something that's made of eggs. And from chavitim, he would make chavita, which is an omelet in Hebrew, mahvat, which is a pan in Hebrew, etc., etc., etc. And if, by mistake, any of them utters a foreign word, the other one has every right to pinch him. Remember those pinches? We'll get back to them. Life in Jerusalem was very difficult. The two Jewish congregations, the two Jewish communities in Jerusalem, the Sephardics and the Ashkenazis, were not Zionists at all. They did not want to get in trouble with the Ottoman rulers of the country, and speaking Hebrew, the Ottomans saw it as a political act, and they didn't want to hear anything of Hebrew. So if you get to a hostile city and you want to persuade all the Jews in this hostile city to start speaking a language which they don't know and don't wish to know, where would you start? It's a problem. It's difficult. So one day I was giving this lecture in Tzuba, in a kibbutz near Jerusalem, to a kindergarten. And I asked the children, where would he start? Where would he start? And the children didn't have any answer except for one who said, I have a great idea, I have a great idea. Yes, yes, tell him to open a bank in Hebrew. Jews love money, it would work. He didn't. Three means of promoting Hebrew. One, journalism. He started 2 daily newspapers, which he handed out for free because, if you give it out for free, Jews would take it. These were not the respectable newspapers of the time. The good newspapers were in the languages of culture, Arabic and French. But little by little, Jews started picking those strange leaflets and see whether with their synagogue language they can understand what crazy Ben Yudke, as they called him, writes about. 2, education. Eliezer ben Yehuda said, my generation, his generation, is lost. Children should learn in Hebrew, and they'll speak Hebrew and their parents would follow. So he begged all the teachers in the schools and kindergartens to teach in Hebrew. But how? There were no games in Hebrew, no books in Hebrew, no songs in Hebrew. He wrote them all by himself. Not with great talent, but at least the teachers had something to work with, and little by little children started playing in Hebrew and their parents followed. And 3, we're talking about a revolution here, and there's no revolution without good old violence. So let me give you 3 examples of Ben Yehuda violence. First, we all know the city of Rehovot, a city in central Israel with a very important university in the middle. At the time, Rehovot was a little village of Jewish immigrants from Russia, farmers growing vineyards. In the center of Rehovot, nowadays it's the Herzl Avenue, with big trees. At the time, a path with not trees, but bushes with aspirations on both sides. At dusk, the farmers of Rehovot would come back home, and they had still an hour of light to walk to and fro on this narrow path and talk about whatever happened during the day. The children of Rehovot got a task from their teachers to hide behind the bushes on both sides of the road and listen. In which language do their parents discuss whatever happened during the day? And if, God forbid, they hear that they speak Russian or Yiddish, they had every permission to jump from behind the bush and prick their parents' tuches with a needle that they got from Eliezer ben Yehuda. And hence we conquered Rehovot. Story number 2, as I told you, the Ben Yehuda family was persecuted by the ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem. They refused to trade with Eliezer ben Yehuda. They refused to hire him. They refused to bury his dead. They threw stones at him when he was walking the street. They told the Ottoman rulers of the country that he was a British spy, and he sat in jail for that. Not that he was a spy, of course. The house of the Ben Yehuda family sat on, this is the house that they moved to. Their first home was in the old city in Jerusalem, between the walls, but then they moved to a house that sat on the road that led from the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods of Jerusalem to the only hospital that was in Jerusalem in those days. One Friday night, the Ben Yehuda family was having a Shabbat dinner, and suddenly they hear crying from the street, the voice of a young woman shouting in Yiddish, Gewalt, Gewalt, Mamale, I'm dying, Gewalt, Jews, help me, God, come to the rescue, Gewalt, I'm dying. The children rush to the balcony, look down, what do they see? In their yard, a young Haredi, a young ultra-Orthodox woman, is lying on her back and giving birth. Turned out that the young woman was 9 months pregnant. She was in labor. She didn't want, well, they didn't have taxis in those days, but she didn't want to take a horse and carriage to the hospital because maybe Shabbat would enter and it would be a Chilul Shabbat. So she trusted God and started walking to the hospital. God was apparently busy somewhere else. And with her luck, water broke down as she was under the house of Ben Yudke, crazy Ben Yudke. There she is, hysterical, lying on her back, giving birth at his yard, shouting, Gewalt, Gewalt, I'm dying, Jews, do something. The kids get pressed, run back home, grab their father by the sleeve, do something. Eliezer ben Yehuda steps out to the balcony, looks down. She's shouting, Gewalt. He looks at her and he says, shout in Hebrew, and walks back in. So, story number 3 about violence. A few years ago, I get an email from a lady whom I did not know. And she writes, Dear Mr. Hovav, my father passed away. I want to publish a book with his writings. One of the texts I want to publish is a letter he wrote to my mother after a visit to the Ben Yehuda residence. The Ben Yehuda residence, they were so poor that their first house, residence, was a studio apartment on the 2nd floor in the cotton market in the old city. The only problem was that the building did not have a staircase. So if you wanted to get into their apartment, you had to climb a ladder and get in through the window. Ben Yehuda residence. Anyways, she says that she wants to publish this letter. I write, back, well, first of all, my condolences. Secondly, it's very polite of you to ask my permission, but even according to Israeli law, if one side of the correspondence is okay with its publication, it's totally kosher, it's yours, do whatever you wish to do. She writes back, young man, you want to read this letter before I publish it. I say, okay, send it over. In the letter, her father writes that he came to visit Eliezer ben Yehuda and sat with him and had a discussion. And when Dvorah, my great-grandmother, entered the room and laid a tray with tea on the table, he saw that both her arms were black with bruises of pinches. Now, this is not a funny story. It's not a nice story. It's not cute. He was violent. He wasn't beating his wife. Let's not get carried away. But when he said he would pinch, he pinched. But you see, he was a prophet. He was one of our prophets. What's the problem with prophets and revolutionists? They lack a sense of humor. They don't see that reality can be read from both sides in two different ways. They see only one light at the end of the tunnel. But sometimes when the light they see is a true light, we gain a lot. I never knew him. He died 40 years before I was born. I never knew my grandfather, the first Hebrew child. He died 20 years before I was born. But I knew some of my grandfather's siblings. So some of the children of Eliezer ben Yehuda, they all admired him. And he was a very difficult father. They called him a back father because he would work 18 hours a day on the big Hebrew Ben Yehuda dictionary with his back to the room. At the time, a desk would look like this. You wouldn't sit and work at a desk. You would stand up and respect your work. A person that, as my grandfather described his father, a person that all his life he was dying. He was left with half a lung. This is what he had to breathe with after tuberculosis. Standing up 18 hours a day, facing a wall. On the wall, a little tapestry that his wife embroidered saying, Hayom katzer vehamelacha meruba. Day is short and work is plentiful. Working 18 hours a day with his back to the room so he won't be distracted. The children were not allowed to address their father. If they wanted to speak to him, they had to hand in a written request to their mother, and then maybe a few days later they would get a 5-minute interview with their father. But they all admired him. They never stopped thanking not God, because in my family the relationship is not that close, but destiny, okay? For the privilege that they had to live with a prophet. Whenever they would talk about him to me, they wouldn't say dad or my father or something like that. They would always say my illustrious father. This is how they saw him. Life in Jerusalem wasn't easy. 10 years after the immigration to the land of Israel, to Palestine, Dvorah, my great-grandmother, contracts tuberculosis from him and dies. And he is left with 5 children. The publication of the daily newspaper stops for 2 weeks. And you know, a newspaper may print anything, but if it doesn't appear, that's a sin. And after 2 weeks, it reappears with a little black box at the front saying the Ben Yehuda family regrets not publishing the newspaper for 2 weeks. During these 2 weeks, 3 of our children died. And he is left with 2 orphans, my grandfather, the first Hebrew child, and my grandfather's sister, Yemima. And he writes a letter to the Yonas family, who by the time moved to Moscow already and was very well-to-do. And he writes, your daughter died. I want to marry her younger sister, Beile. Her younger sister, Beile, who was 12 years younger than himself. He gets a letter back. A brilliant idea. Now, for years, I was wondering what was it in this annoying person that made all the Yonas ladies fall in love with him. But I never dared to ask because my illustrious father, I knew I would get slapped. Eventually, I asked Dola, my great aunt Dola, so the daughter of Eliezer ben Yehuda and his second wife, who was the sister of his first wife. And Dola, in Hebrew, we call it neshama v'chetzi, a soul and a half in the body of one person. She was very ditty. Nowadays, you say ADHD or something like this. She could never concentrate, and she was out of breath, and she was always excited at this. And I asked her, Dola, what was it in your father that made all the Yonas sister want to marry him? And she said, Gili, my sweet, now I will tell you a story. I wanted to know too, but I did not dare ask because I knew they would be offended until one day I got the nerve to ask my aunt Pnina. Pnina is the third Yonah sister who immigrated from Russia to the States. And Pnina said, Dola, now I will reveal my secret. All of my life, I was praying for the health of your dear mother, but I would add to God at the end of the prayer that if, God forbid, anything would happen to her, maybe he will marry me too. So I guess there is no other explanation except for the fact that he was deadly sexy, which runs in the family, as you can see. This wasn't a joke. Um, People tell him, what are you doing? What do you want from Beile Yonas? She's 12 years younger than yourself. She's a chemistry student in one of the best universities in the world, sitting happy in Moscow. You want to bring her over here to marry an aging, sick person hated by his community, to be the mother of two orphans? Leave her alone. And he's persuaded, and like he did with his first wife, he writes the same telegram again. Maybe it's not a good idea. You don't have to marry me. Marry whoever you wish to. He gets a telegram back. On my way to you, wait for a letter. He gets the letter, and in the letter she says, I'm on my way to marry you. And if it's for one day, and if it's for 1 year, and if it's for the rest of my life, this is my destiny. He takes a boat to Turkey, she takes a train to Turkey, they get married in Turkey, sail to Jaffa, to the port of the land of Israel, and again do the 8-hour trip uphill in a horse and carriage to meet the two orphans of her elder sister who were waiting to greet her at the gates of Jerusalem. When they get married, the first thing he tells her, your name is no longer Beile, your name is Chemda. And she accepts it, of course. And Chemda wrote a few books. And some of them were published, some of them were not. One that was not published is called My War with Satan, which is the story of, it's a sort of a memoir, a story about the publication of the big dictionary. We'll talk about it in a second. And it wasn't published. And one day I went to the manuscript is kept at the National Library. I went to the National Library. I asked for the manuscript. I said, I want to read about the family. And in the manuscript, she describes her bridal journey from Moscow to meeting the two orphans of her sister waiting for her at the gates of Jerusalem. And she describes this ride uphill to Jerusalem, and I read it, and I tell myself, this is our Mayflower. This is aristocracy. This is how Zionism was done. And then she gets to the point when she sees them for the first time at the gates of Jerusalem, and she writes, and then I saw them, two such filthy, ugly apes I never saw in my life. And I tell myself, dear Mr. Hovav, this is the aristocrat you are, a filthy, ugly ape. Remember that. We should talk a bit about Chemda, because, often history is unkind to women. And often history attributes achievements of women to the men they lived with. Now, nobody can take Hebrew from Eliezer ben Yehuda. The revival of Hebrew as a spoken language and the big dictionary are his. I don't know if you ever saw the big dictionary. Whenever I give this lecture to young students, I tell them it's huge, it's immense, it's as big as the Encyclopedia Britannica. And they all look at me and say, as big as what? And I say, it's as big as Wikipedia, okay? You get it now? It's something that nations take upon themselves to achieve, not one sickly person standing up 18 hours a day and writing. 17 volumes, and at the time, publishing one volume, the price was $500,000. Now, $500,000, where from? They were so poor that, as she writes in her memoir, there were days when the only thing that came into their mouth was the glue of the stamps with which they were sending the newspapers to the settlements. $500,000 for one volume from 17. Where from? She got it all by herself. She traveled alone, a woman alone at the turn of the 20th century, by camel, by car, by train, by boat, no airplanes, to Iraq and to the States and to Germany and to France and to Cairo to beg, borrow, and steal and get money for the publication of the big dictionary. When Eliezer ben Yehuda died in 1922, only 5 volumes of the 17 were published. She took it upon herself to go on with the publication of the rest. And later on, my grandfather joined her, and then some other big scholars. And when she died, 30 years later, in 1952, only 11 volumes of the big dictionary were published. And so to almost end this short talk, I'd like to tell you a very sweet story about how Chemda died. And this is a story I heard from a relative of mine. We call him Little Eliezer, because Eliezer ben Yehuda is Big Eliezer, and this is his grandson, so he's Little Eliezer. So Eliezer ben Yehuda and Chemda, the second wife, had a boy and 3 girls. The boy's name was Ehud. Ehud had a boy and a girl. The boy he named Eliezer, and the girl he named Eliezra. Crazy family. Anyways, this little Eliezer was a very big guy, and he told me this story. In 1952, his grandmother, Chemda, the widow of Eliezer ben Yehuda, was bedridden. He was alone at home with her. She calls him to her room, and she tells him he was 8 years old, and she tells him, Eliezer, take this note. It has a phone number in it. Dial this phone number and say that Chemda ben Yehuda says that David and Moshe must come right away. He dials, and within 20 minutes, David and Moshe are knocking at the door. What do we learn from this story? That in the young Israel of 1952, the state was 4 years old, when an 8-year-old kid dials the office of the prime minister and says, Chemda ben Yehuda says that David and Moshe must come right away, David ben Gurion, the prime minister, and Moshe Sharet, the secretary of state, come right away. Because they were terrified of her. She was a horrible, 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 horrible woman. The whole of Jerusalem was terrified of her. And he ushers them to her bed. She lies there covered to her chin, and they stand like this, shivering next to her, totally shocked. And she looks up at them and she says, guys, I am going to die, but I won't die until you promise me that the big dictionary is going to be published to the end. Now, they were all so shocked and afraid that immediately said, no, don't nod at me. You will say it with your own mouth. And if you won't say it, I won't die. So they said yes, and she died. But, because of her and because of him, I have a homeland, and I have my culture, and I have my language, and I have my identity, and I have my pride. I know who I am. And I have a daughter. Now she doesn't live at home. She's 22 years old. She's a soldier already. But when she was a kid, every morning when she would open her beautiful blue eyes, she wouldn't say, I love you. And she wouldn't say, Je t'aime. And she wouldn't say, Ana bahibbak. She would say, Ani ohevet otcha. So I guess it was worth it. Thank you. And only because you were very good kids, I owe you the end of the first story. So here I am at the desk of the newspaper, getting word that it happened yet again. The graves are desecrated, nasty graffitis. Eventually, I called my aunt. I said, news are not mine. She'll read about it in the newspaper the next day anyway. My aunt said, Gili, did you only get word about what happened or did you get photographs? And I said, come on, leave it. I'll send my elderly aunt photographs of the desecrated graves of the family. She said, no. You don't have to send me anything. I want you to look at the pictures. I said, okay. She said, the nasty graffitis, in which language? And I said, in Hebrew. And she said, yes, we won. Thank you very much.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you, Gil. So we do have some time for questions. So I'll come around with the mic and people can ask some questions. So.
It's not exactly a question, but the granddaughter of Chemda lived in the community that I lived in California. And I'm so glad you talked about the hardship that she endured and that the first wife endured, because that's all she would ever talk about.
Yes.
How hard it was for them. Nobody would talk to them. They couldn't do anything, and they really suffered.
Yes. One of the daughters of Eliezer ben Yehuda Dola, the one who told me about getting nerve to ask who was a very close relative, and told me that when they were very poor and quite hated in the community, and one day she and her sister Ada came home to their mother Chemda, who admired Eliezer ben Yehuda, of course, and told her, we go to school with shoes in holes in them and with clothes that who knows how old they are. And the daughter of the French consul always comes with chocolates. And the daughter of the German consul comes with beautiful clothes. And the daughter of the Russian consul, etc., etc., etc. And Chemda ben Yehuda told them, so they have chocolate, but you are the daughters of Eliezer ben Yehuda. So I think that if eventually they understood that it's much more.
I just wanted to know why the Neturei Karta hate and desecrate the graves of your great-great.
For two reasons. The super ultra Orthodox community was and still is opposed to Eliezer ben Yehuda. First of all, because they thought that Hebrew should remain a sacred language used only for prayer and not used in the bathroom and in the bedroom and in the bank and in places like this. Secondly, the second reason was a political one. Eliezer ben Yehuda was a Zionist. He came to the land of Israel and he saw this community living off donations from the diaspora, not working. Some things never change, do they? And he wrote articles in all the newspapers of the diaspora saying, stop sending them money. We want to build a new, healthy nation where people work. And they saw that he came to, to demolish whatever they believed in. And up until today, the worst boycott, the most severe boycott in Judaism, called Pulsa de Nura, the boycott of fire, is cast upon my family twice. It means that we should all die. So if lightning strikes now and we all die, it's because of me, because it works until Shilashim Veribaim, until third and fourth generation. I'm fourth generation. So far, it didn't work. But they really wished he would die. They really did whatever they could in order to see him dead.
We have time for a few more questions. If anyone on Zoom has a question, feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask. Anybody else in the room? Tom?
Did your family have any relationship with Dvora's family from Moscow?
So the Yonas family in Moscow, first of all, eventually they immigrated to Palestine. They lived in Jerusalem for a while, and then moved to Rishon LeZion, and this is where Mr. Yonas is buried, in Rishon LeZion. Unfortunately, I must say, unfortunately to us, some of you may not agree with me, but he was always secular, and he was a scholar. When he came to the land of Israel, he decided to לחזור בתשובה, to become religious. He became religious, and he died as a religious person, which is not the Ben Yehuda thing to do, but God loves everybody. But I keep finding members of the Yonas family all over the world. A few years ago, when we were visiting someone whom you may know, named Joe Pumper in New Delhi, I met with a totally Indian lady who is a granddaughter of a brother of my great grandmother. And she's Indian, totally, because one of the Yonas sisters married an Indian doctor who was studying in Switzerland. They immigrated back to India, and suddenly she addressed me on email. So there she is. There is a branch of the Yonas family in Paris. But nowadays there are no Yonases anymore. So they all lost their identity. Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask you, Gil, this was wonderful, thank you. But I do have a question. The question is, I heard you were going to also address the issue of non-binary language development in Hebrew that I guess you're involved with. So we look forward to that. Thank
Was
you.
waiting for the question. So it's a very modern thing and quite new in Israel, I must say. I mean, maybe scholars deal with it, but for us as citizens, we don't really deal with it. Hebrew is a Semitic language. There's male and female. There's no neutral. There's no person. You don't say a person. It's either a male or a female. Nowadays, for instance, for reasons of inclusion, which is wonderful, I think they developed a new font of the Hebrew letters that you can write where it looks like it's written in masculine and feminine. So on all schools, it says Bruchim Habaim, welcome to the students, but you can also read it as Bruchot Habaot because the letters look like that. So it's a wonderful thing, but it's very new, and I must say it's very new and very rare in Israel. And whenever you try to impose it on writing, I'm totally okay with the reasons, but it doesn't look right. It doesn't look natural. And I must say, being honest, that it's not really accepted in Israel. It's not. We still have a long way to go.
Barry will finish up with you.
So, okay. In today's Israel, when a new, let's say a computer term needs to be coined into modern Hebrew, what entity is responsible for doing that?
It's the Hebrew Academia, האקדמיה ללשון העברית, the Academia for the Hebrew language. They're very, I really appreciate them. It belongs to the state. It's a lot of scholars sitting together and deciding. They do a great job, totally against the spirit of Eliezer ben Yehuda. As I mentioned, Eliezer ben Yehuda wasn't liked by Bialik, by our national poet, nor was he liked by Agnon, by our national author. nor by Brenner, another great author. They didn't like the idea that he took Hebrew as if it was his own and did whatever he wished to do with Hebrew while reviving it. So when he started the Academia ללשון העברית, the institute that now is in charge of Hebrew, he called it ועד הלשון העברי, the Committee of the Hebrew Language. Brenner, a rival author, called it the Committee of Ignorance and Stupidity. But anyways, 2 months later, Eliezer Ben Yehuda, of course, slammed the door and left because he was always angry at everybody. But nowadays, the academia is very strict and very aimed at biblical language. So they don't really like all the modernism that Eliezer Ben Yehuda introduced into Hebrew. And it's fine because I think that maybe many people ask me, and suppose he rises from the dead, and here's the very strange Hebrew that we all speak today, filled with tech and filled with Arabic and filled with English and filled with Russian and Ethiopian and Yiddish and what would he think? I think he would be elated because, in Israel, we have many wars and not in all of them we win. This is a war we won. Hebrew is alive. People can be intelligent in Hebrew, can be stupid in Hebrew, can be right-winged in Hebrew, can write poetry in Hebrew, can know only Hebrew and not any other language. So he won his war. And for him, I think it was a big thing. And the fact that today the academia thinks, well, a bit differently about Hebrew is okay. The language develops as it develops.
So we're going to take one more question and then we're going to wrap it up.
It's sort of a double question. Growing up, did you find any extra pressure on you because when you were learning Hebrew and writing, did you have to do really well because your great-grandfather invented the language? And also, were the teachers intimidated by that?
So teachers were always intimidated by me. And I'll tell you why. It's not only because of Eliezer Ben Yehuda, because from my other side, one side is Ben Yehuda, the other side is Yemenite. My father was from Yemenite origins, and my father was the news announcer on the radio in Israel. At the time, there was no television, there was one radio channel, and my father was, the voice, people called him the voice of God. And like Yemenites, he had perfect Hebrew. So he trained us to speak Hebrew really, really, really well. And now I lecture a lot abroad and in Israel as well. And sometimes old teachers of mine come to my lectures and they tell, oh, I remember you used to correct my tests. So the homework would come back to the teachers with marks, red marks from me. I think we spoke very good Hebrew because it was so important to both sides of the family. I always loved it. I like this pressure. I'm a bit of an OCD and I like rules and I like that there's, order. And my daughter from age 0 knew that if she would ask for money in the wrong words, if she would say 10 shekel instead of 10 shekalim, she wouldn't see a penny. So she knows how to speak Hebrew correctly, and I hope that she would pass it to my grandchildren when they come. Sorry? No, I didn't pinch her. No, I'm afraid of her.
Well, I want to thank you again, Gil, for a lovely presentation. It was really wonderful.
Be beautiful for a second. I want to take a picture with you so Danny would understand the magnitude of this event. Good.
And then thank everybody else or everybody here for coming again. We're grateful that you could join us. If you have any questions for Gil, I'm sure he'll be around for a little bit. And so you can ask him. And then again, if anyone has any questions on Bet Mishpacha, by all means, ask me or anybody else. So thank you again and have a great rest of your beautiful Sunday.